Hello, bruvs. We're back with a new book, Funeral Customs, Their Origin and Development by Puckle. What's his first? I can't remember his first name. This is a Singing Tree production. The original book was written in 1926. This is a reissue by Singing Tree Press, Book Tower, Detroit, Michigan, 1968. Bertram S. Puckle is the name, and I shall read this in its entirety, unless something happens. What's this woodcut? The Last Voyage, woodblock by John F. Hunter. That's obviously Karen, I believe. What is this? The prototype of the morning coach. We got horses, and we've got the carriage. Forward. Oh, wait, Library of Congress catalog card number 68-26599. Forward. An exhaustive treatise on funeral customs, ancient and modern, has yet to be written, leaving to the theologian and philosopher the thankless task of assigning the mystery of death its proper place and functions in the scheme of creation. The writer has confined himself to a general survey of those practices which surround the physical fact of death, a subject which is as immense as it is fascinating. Whilst investigation shows that almost all our present usages have their origin in stupid pagan superstitions, they have nonetheless an interest of their own to record. It is a wholesome sign that a more enlightened public is slowly releasing death from much of its ugly trappings, for death, beautiful in itself, is only made terrible by groans and convulsions and a discolored face, and friends weeping, and blacks and obsequies. So wrote Bacon 300 years ago in his essay on death. But above all, believe me, he concludes, the sweetest canticle is Nunc Dimittis, whatever the hell that means. Bertram S. Puckle, Richmond, August 30th, 1926. What do you got, bruvs? Acknowledgement. The author wishes to express his sincere thanks to many friends who have helped him, blah, blah, blah. And let's take a look at the contents before we get into chapter 1. The provisions of nature, death warnings when death does take place, preparation for burial, coffins, grave goods, suttee. I think that's what it is. Suttee. Wakes, mutes, whalers, sin-eating, totemism, death, taxes. Chapter 5, bells, mourning. Chapter 6, funeral feasts and processions. Chapter 7, early burial places. Chapter 8, churchyards, cemeteries, orientation, and other burial customs. Chapter 9, trees, flowers, body snatching. Chapter 10, plague. Chapter 11, state and public funerals. Chapter 12, cremation and embalming. Chapter 13, in memoriam. Chapter 14, memorials, epitaphs, rings, and mourning cards. And then there's an index as well. List of illustrations. We shall go get to those when we get to them. Let me put something under this so I don't destroy the book. There we go. Now you can lay flat, book. Where's my trusty knife? Where's my trusty knife? Where is it? So I can set something up. Maybe I'll just stick my bell on here. We'll stick the bell on there. Funeral Customs, Chapter 1, The Provisions of Nature. In the animal kingdom, a dead body arouses no feelings of fear or repulsion. In most cases, it is looked upon as a generous gift of nature, of which the fullest advantage is to be taken, or the opportunity lost to competition. It is difficult to appreciate how vast a number of birds, beasts, and insects inhabit the fields and woods, and we may well ask ourselves the question, what becomes of their dead? In a day's search, we may not find among all the teeming wild population a single stiffened body, or one bright eye glazed in death. Here in a clearing we may have chanced upon some blood-stained grass and a few scattered feathers which gave evidence of the hawk or carrion crow, but this is very far from accounting for anything like the greater proportion of the short-lived race. Has nature, then, her undertaker? Certainly she has. He is appropriately known as the Necrophorus mortuorum, or more popularly as the sexton beetle, for he is equipped with spade and all that is necessary for undertaking. There is much that the human variety might learn from this humble and industrious insect. Whilst he is dressed in a conventional garb of black, hey, he's goth. He's a goth beetle. He seeks to enliven matters by means of two broad bands of yellow on his back. He is cheery, and when his duties are over for the day, he indulges in a little music. Not perhaps, and hold on, camera, not perhaps entirely a matter of art for art's sake, but like most joyous notes of nature, his immediate object is to attract the attention of the opposite sex. Whoa. In praising the Necrophorus mortuorum, we must admit that in his work he is not actuated by motives of disinterested philanthropy any more than is the case with the human undertaker. Nature is indeed far too wise to entrust any important work to the spasmodic efforts of the well-intentioned. If she wants a job done thoroughly, she does not grudge a reasonable wage for services rendered. If during our lives we are often able to disguise from ourselves that we are but superior animals, the disabilities of birth and death bring the fact unmistakably before us. The helplessness of a newborn babe is proverbial, but nature has provided it with the means of making its urgent necessities unmistakably apparent, and she has not been less considerate to the corpse. We must not be shocked to hear that it is by means of the olfactory organ. Whoa. Do your job, beetle. Of the olfactory organ that the sexton beetle is made aware of the proximity of a new client. Once having sensed the job, he communicates the good news to his wife, and together they fly off to the house of mourning by the shortest possible route, for competition is keen. Arrived at the spot, they find the corpse to be that of a recently deceased mouse. Having feasted, other helpers having also arrived, the male beetle proceeds to excavate around the body till by a process of gradual undermining it sinks into a considerable hollow, thus prepared for its reception. The work is finished by piling the earth neatly on top. For the purpose of excavation, nature has provided the sexton beetle with club-shaped antennae, which are supported by strong muscles equal to the work that they are called upon to perform. It should be stated that Mrs. Beetle remains in possession of the body in which her eggs are laid. Surely this is a sanitary and logical conclusion to a commonplace event in which everybody concerned is paid off and satisfied. Are they saying that she lays her eggs in the dead mouse? It teaches a lesson that burial is a natural method of disposing of the dead, and it gives more than a hint that, believe what we will of the prospects of a future life, death is only a rather misleading term for a changed, by no means an impaired activity. It will be self-evident that in dealing with the larger animals such as bears, lions, etc., the sexton beetle, however numerous and industrious be his kind, would be sorely taxed if he received a call from a client. We must not, however, underrate the extraordinary power of the insect world when working together with a common objective. In the jungle, the greater feeds on the lesser, and the jackal and vulture scavenge what remains. The busy workers living in organized communities deal with their dead on lines more akin to human necessities. Their own dead, or a chance intruder into the ant hill city, will be treated with system and dispatch, and the body removed long before it has any opportunity to prove offensive or dangerous to the community. The ants, being carnivorous, will quickly devour any beasts or insects which may die near their nests. And if anything uneatable, that's a strange word, remains, a squad of workers will be summoned at once to remove the offense to some more convenient place. What do you got, Brovs? Title of the book, Funeral Customs. You got it right there. The bee, having no use to make of the body, has but one idea, and that is to expel the corpse, or so deal with it that the carefully regulated atmosphere of the hive shall not suffer from the presence of any poisonous fumes. The workers of their community who are set apart for scavenging purposes will soon eject the body by shouldering or pushing it out of the hive. If the intruder be a slug or snail, it may happen that it has climbed into such a position that its bulk will render it impossible for the bees to deal with in the ordinary manner. In such a case, the unhappy adventurer is quickly walled up with wax in the position in which he is found, and the tomb hermetically sealed past all fear of any harm to the city. At exactly what period superstition affected death and burial, it is of course impossible to say. Perhaps it was taught to man by the sigh of the wind in the trees, or the dramatic terrors of the thunderstorm. However it came about, we know that the possibility of a spirit world was an early consideration. Why am I reading about funeral customs? Because we're all going to have a funeral, Bubba. The valiant hunter, undismayed by fierce encounters with wild beasts and his own kind, learned to crouch and shiver at the shadows, or having slain his adversary, he fled from the accusing eye and hid from the avenging spirit. Even today, among savage tribes, it is quite common to find the shadow of a man attacked by the witch doctor, in the belief that it is the soul. We may well suppose that in such matters a very long time would elapse before anything concrete enough to be called a religion took possession of man's mind. Asked by a missionary what were the gods he worshipped, a savage replied, "We know that someone walks amongst the trees at night, but we never mention it." This is probably the state of mind of the early inhabitants of the earth. With a belief in good and evil spirits inhabiting material things, we can at once trace this influence in funeral customs, for there is hardly a practice which has not had its origins in the old dread of haunting and revengeful ghosts. When the next stage is reached, the belief in a general participation in a future life, a whole range of interesting happenings develop. These are the foundation stones upon which our present-day usages are built, varying in accordance with all sorts of minor considerations, such as climatic environment, etc. Belief in a future state presupposed a material existence after death, with corresponding material necessities. Food must be provided, weapons and clothing, and a supply of charms with which to ward off those evil influences which the soul might expect to encounter on its journey. Special provision would be made for those of rank, wives and servants for the chief, and a horse and attendant for the warrior and hunter. This early attitude of mind was based on the supposition that death would surely bring with it that completeness of desire, too often unsatisfied during the earthly existence. That the ultimate state was one of happiness seems to have been generally taken for granted. Can we say that the symbols used by a past generation as expressions of a state of bliss, such as crowns, harps, streets paved with gold, and gates of pearl, have not often enough been accepted literally, and no higher lever than the happy hunting ground of the American Indian? Amongst these materialistic views, we may place the idea of death as an endless sleep or physical rest, too long denied to tired, laborious lives. We shall have evidence enough that a literal acceptance of this figure of physical rest and sleep in the grave represents the real aspirations of a number of people today, as in a past generation. Thus, we find a conception of the soul linked in various ways to earthly associations. Loosed from the body, it was once supposed that the spirit quickly returned to its old surroundings, gifted with many supernatural powers, against which the living were unable to conceal their thoughts. It is indeed a sad insight into the human conscience to discover what elaborate precautions were considered necessity in order to avoid the persecutions of the revengeful dead. Ask away, bruv. I want to make sure I didn't skip a page here. No, I did not. Chapter 2. Death warnings. When does death take place? It is perhaps natural. Who do you feel about death? You're one for one. Don't care. Death warnings. When does death take place? It is perhaps natural that around the three great mysteries, birth, love, and death, a crowd of superstitions cling, the children of those unnamed fears which accompany so many of us from the cradle to the grave, and which certainly dominated the lives of less enlightened generations. Yes, I care about my life. My death is none of my concern. That death, the greatest of all mysteries, should be singled out to be embroidered with many fantasies, does not surprise us. Many of the superstitions which we shall note are obviously nothing more than a chain of associated ideas, such as, for instance, the very general belief that it is unlucky to sit down 13 to a meal, it being held that the first to rise from the table will go to his death. The origin of this superstition is, of course, the Last Supper, from whence Judas, one of the 12, left the table and went out into the night to betray his Lord. No. Death warnings, as they are called, have nearly all an obvious origin. A raven or other black-feathered bird is seen to alight on the thatch of a cottage where a man is dying. Simply by force of associated ideas, the gossiping neighbors agree at once that the bird is an omen of speedy dissolution, which event taking place shortly after, a new warning is added to the ever-growing list. There are, however, certain superstitions which cannot be readily accounted for unless we are prepared to admit the existence of supernatural intervention. There is, in fact, a considerable amount of testimony in favor of certain hard-dying beliefs, the origin of which it is outside our purpose to consider, such, for instance, as the well-authenticated cases of dreams in which a warning has been given of the approaching death of friends and relatives, or in some cases of the dreamer himself. Death in life can be a relief. Right. We are familiar with stories of persons so condemned who have thought by special precautions to avert the fate of which they have been warned. It has been said that once the mind of the person has been infected by a belief that death is inevitable on a certain day, the action of the mind upon a frail body may well be responsible for the physical result. This is an explanation which many will prefer to hold. Amongst such beliefs, perhaps the most familiar is the frequently repeated assertion that a clock has stopped at the very moment that a death took place, with which may be classed our old friend, the falling picture, and the supernatural summons to the bedside of a dying person. It would be quite impossible to attempt to chronicle anything like a complete list of death warnings, but the following are worth noting. It is generally believed by sailors and fisher folk that death is delayed till the ebb of the tide. It will be remembered that Dickens used this superstition in David Copperfield. It being low water, he, Barkis, went out with the tide. In Scotland, a white rose blooming in autumn is accounted as an omen of an early death. In Devon, if a sick person begs for a draught of cider, it is also a sign of death. This superstition rather suggests that the desire being gratified, the patient might well succumb from the effects of that ungenerous beverage. The ebbing tide and the unusual appearance of the white rose in autumn may be safely catalogued as associated ideas, and also the very general belief that the fire burning black on one side is a token of a death in the family, or the peculiar formation of wax round a burning candle, which suggests a white shroud. Similar explanations might be reasonably given for the following. When a dying person sees something white, or if he sees something black, a less enviable fate awaits him. When fruit and flowers appear on the same tree, if you should be so imprudent as to wash clothes, on a Good Friday you are said to wash someone out of the family. If you chance to drop a mirror in which you have seen your own reflection, you have killed the reflection, hence you are doomed. If you shiver, it is said by the gossips that someone is walking over your grave. If you dream of nursing a baby and the baby cries, you will either die yourself or lose a near relative. All these superstitions are foolish and harmless enough, but one might be mentioned which has led to much trouble and has a wide influence even over the minds of people who ought to be better informed. The belief that if a person makes a will, it is a sign that they will die shortly after. The following has a less obvious origin and may well be a survival of the belief in nature spirits. It is said to be unlucky to save a drowning man, for on being brought back to life, it is thought that he will wreak vengeance on his rescuer at the dictation of the water spirits, who have thus been balked of their lawful prey. Hope you sleep a good one. Here is your clown back. The hell are you talking about? Are you soulless? As in dancing, yes, I have no soul. We see the nature spirit again in the legend of the pool of Brereton, Cheshire, in which the trunks of trees are said to swim on certain days before the death of the heir of the estate, as also in the legend of Credenhill Court, Herefordshire, where an ancient elm known as Prophet Elm is supposed to shed its branches as a token, not a token, but a token of the death of the head of the house. The connection between certain trees and funerary customs should be noted, for here we shall find later many traces of the most ancient of all religions, the worship of trees. It is certain, says Carew, Survey of Cornwall, that divers ancient families in England are forewarned of their death in the mansion by oaks bearing strange leaves. An example of this is an oak in Landhadron Park, Cornwall, which bears speckled leaves before a death in the family. In some country estates, the rooks are said to abandon their nests at the approach of death and do not return until after the funeral. As in humble homes, the crickets and the mice retire in like manner from the domestic hearth. It is perhaps in the nature of things that royal and illustrious families receive special warnings not vouchsafed to meaner men, otherwise it would be difficult to account for a number of instances where a special forerunner of disaster appears to be provided for their exclusive information. One of the best known examples being the White Lady of the Hohenzollern. Hohenzollern? Zollern? This spook is said to have appeared to Napoleon and has been frequently seen in Karlsruhe and other royal palaces since the middle of the 17th century as the invariable herald of disaster to members of the family. The royal houses of Bavaria and Romanov are also credited with ghostly visitants. It is, however, worth noting that their generous services are of little value, as we have no instance where the illustrious persons have been able to avoid their fate by virtue of these dramatic warnings. At the marriage ceremony of the crown princess Louisa of Saxony, 3 archdukes who were standing close to me became so impatient that in order to find another way out of the chapel, they jumped over my train. My brother-in-law, the Archduke Otto, noticed this and said in rather perturbed tones, "Do you know the Habsburg superstition that anyone who jumps over a bride's train dies in the same year?" "Well, it's November now, so they will have to be quick about it," I said, trying to pass it off lightly, for I saw that Otto was really upset at the occurrence, for many uncanny things happened to us Habsburgs. If it was a coincidence, it was truly a remarkable one that in a fortnight's time the Archdukes Sigismund and Ernest died, only to be followed at the end of December by the third Archduke, Karl Ludwig. The same princess relates having seen in November 1902 the phantom black cat which is said to appear on the altar of the royal chapel in the Zinzendorf Strasse, Dresden, to presage disaster. The banshee or woman of the fairies of Irish legend has always a very select clientele and can only be induced to wail or keen, as it is called, for the very best families. In Wales, this spook is known as the Witch of Ribon, whose lamentations are not to be confused with the Syrath, or groaning spirit. Who comes up with these damn names? Before we examine the rites and customs of burial in their natural sequence, there is one aspect of the subject which deserves some special consideration, and that is the very debatable point as to exactly when death may be said to have taken place. The thought of the possibility of being buried alive is a very real and haunting terror to a large number of sensitive people, as we may be assured if we study the curious clauses in wills which frequently appear in the press. 2 recent examples of this may be quoted. A lady dying at Hever in Kent left substantial sums of money for charitable purposes and directed that my body shall be stabbed to the heart to make sure that life is extinct. And the following from the will of a wealthy man who recently died at Herne Bay. At my death, a medical man shall make such experiments as may be necessary to make sure that life is extinct, and until the burial, my remains are to be watched over by 2 nuns. Such requests have always been quite common, and show how deep is the fear of being buried alive. In the year 1896, the Association for the Prevention of Premature Burial was founded to safeguard its members against premature burial by arrangement, with medical experts in various localities who would scientifically certify death in accordance with certain tests laid down by the association. A further object of the society was the scientific investigation of trance. Writing in support of this movement, the matter was well summed up by Sir W. J. Collins, M.D., FRCS, ex-chairman, LCC, who said, "It is morbid sentiment that precludes the adequate consideration of the subject in this country, which it is only too easy to dismiss it with ill-directed jest." The hell did that mean? Suppose that a person has passed away, he no longer breathes, the action of the heart has ceased, and the doctor has pronounced life to be extinct. Perhaps some test has been applied, such as breathing on glass, a very popular expedient, and there appears to be nothing left to be done but to make arrangements for the burial. It would be somewhat startling to the average person to learn, on the authority of Dr. Brouardel, the eminent French specialist, director of the Morgue, Paris, who made a life study of the subject, that this is a grave popular error. For many persons who no longer breathe have been recalled to life by means of care and skill. He says further, the moment of death cannot therefore be assumed to be identical with cessation of respiration. As regards the beating of the heart, he recalls a case where a man was executed at Troyes, whose heart beat for an hour after decapitation, the body being accompanied from the scaffold by two doctors who verified this fact. Dr. Brouardel gives several instances of apparent death and quotes the following case in which he himself was present from verbatim copy of notes taken the same evening. Ploigno, October 1st, 1867, midnight. I exhumed at 8 p.m. Philomel Jeannetre, age 24, buried at 5 p.m. in a grave 6 feet deep. Several persons heard her tap distinctly against the lid of the coffin. These blows appeared to me to have left visible marks, but I did not hear them myself. He then goes on to describe the absence of all the ordinary signs of death, rigor mortis, and the like. Ammonia and other restoratives were applied. He then continues, she was not dead, but like a candle, the flames of which had been extinguished, though the wick continues to glow. No definite sounds of the heart, but the eyelids moved in my presence. The body was kept unburied till the following day. This, he adds, is an authentic case of burial during life. And that's from Dr. Brouardel, Death and Sudden Death. From many sources more or less reliable, similar instances of premature burial might be quoted. In the churchyard of Rye, Sussex, there was a tombstone now defaced by age, depicting the figure of a woman sitting upright in her coffin, of whom the following curious story is related. She was subject to attacks of syncope. I'm not sure if that's how you say it. Syncope, and was supposed on one occasion to be dead. Or is that syncope? Wrapped in a shroud, her body was placed in a coffin in the old Flushing Inn, which is still standing. Thus she lay till the morning of the day appointed for her burial. The oven was being heated for the baking of the funeral repast when she awoke, climbed out of her coffin, and walked downstairs, where she was found by the horrified cook, standing before the kitchen fire, complaining that she felt the cold. She lived for some years after this extraordinary experience. It would seem that there is a period of suspended animation which may occur from various causes, and which is very likely to be mistaken for death. Evelyn, the diarist, gives the following quaint account of a resurrection. Supped at Sir William Petty's, famous for having brought back to life a poor wench who had been hanged for felony, her body having been begged, as the custom is, for the anatomy lectures. He had her put to lie with a warm woman, surely some credit is due to the warm woman, and with spirits and other means restored her to life. A full account of this exploit was published at the time in a pamphlet entitled News from the Dead, or a true and exact relation of the miraculous deliverance of Anne Green, who having been executed December 14th, 1650, afterwards revived, and by the care of a certain physician is now perfectly recovered. It is well known that the Indian faker and his kind, under the influence of control, allow themselves to be buried for 3 weeks or longer, at the end of which period the flickering flame of life returns. When does death take place? Anyone who has assisted at the restoration to life of a body recovered from the water, who has seen the miracle of returning animation to an apparently lifeless body as a result of scientific treatment, lasting perhaps an hour or even longer, will hesitate forever after to judge the matter on a basis of appearances, for it is between the time when the ordinary symptoms of death are apparent and the actual setting in of putrefaction that science may find a means to revive life. It is rather by a combination of recognized signs than by dependence upon any particular test that life may safely be pronounced to be extinct, and it is only a qualifying person, after careful examination, who has any right to give such a verdict. In both the animal and vegetable kingdom, examples are not wanting to show the wonderful provision of nature to protect the life of her children in extraordinary circumstances. The common pond trout, frozen in snow, will remain apparently lifeless for days, but will revive at once if placed in water again. Despite the far-fetched stories of toads who are often said to remain embedded in trees or built up in walls for years and to come to life again on their release, there can be no doubt that such creatures are able to suspend animation for lengthy periods in unfavorable conditions. Before leaving this subject, there is another side of the question of which even less is known, and that is, granted that man has a soul, when does the soul leave his body? It has been the general practice in all ages to reserve the corpse for a certain period before burial. The actual time has depended somewhat on local conditions, climate, and the like, and the custom is further influenced by the natural desire of affection which dictates that the body should be kept from dissolution as long as it is possible. But woven into these practices is the dim consciousness that the soul may not have finally severed the link which has bound it for so long to the body. Various customs, which we shall presently consider, show how deeply this thought has a hold on our minds. At the present time, when men of science are no longer ashamed to be associated with the belief in a spiritual existence after death, it is interesting to follow the results of their investigations, to confirm by demonstration what we have hitherto accepted, perhaps with a flickering faith. We gather that the modern spiritualist holds that the soul dominates the physical life. And only when it leaves the body can death take place and decomposition set in. So far, he would seem to agree with the general practice of all ages, that the body should not be buried till these signs are unmistakably present. But he takes us a step further, or farther, for he professes to have proof that the soul is attached to the body by an elastic cord of unlimited tension to the various vital parts of the body, and we are told that for a period lasting for days or weeks, in the case of an active man meeting with a sudden death, the soul is not severed from the body, even if burial has taken place in the meantime. And that was from J. Hewitt Mackenzie's Spirit Intercourse, Its Theory and Practice. How far we are prepared to credit such evidence must be a matter of personal consideration. To scoff is wholly irrational, for we shall find that many of the observances we cherish today have their origin in the grossest superstition of which any intelligent person might well be ashamed. Various experiments have been tried with a view to overcoming the possibility of premature burial. What we know as mortuary chambers were established in Germany. They were built for the purpose of providing a resting place to which bodies could be removed immediately after death had presumably taken place, in order that they might be systematically under observation till putrefaction had definitely set in. Every possible precaution was taken to this end. A bell rope was placed in the hand of the corpse, so that should any return of consciousness take place, it would be immediately notified. As an additional precaution, an official was in constant attendance, whose duty it was to inspect the bodies in his charge from time to time. It will be some consolation to those who suffer from a horror of being buried alive to learn that no instance has been recorded of bodies placed in these mortuary chambers having come to life. These institutions are not to be confused with the mortuary or morgue. Amongst the very many evils existing in connection with our methods of disposing of the dead may be cited not only a general lack of proper mortuary accommodation throughout the country, but particularly the attitude both of the officials and the public towards this most necessary institution. The thought that the bodies of friends and relations should be taken to a mortuary suggests to the average mind an indignity, a social degradation. The mortuary is regarded as especially provided by the state for the bodies of unfortunate outcasts picked up from the gutter or dragged from the river, or at the best as a place where the suicide or a person meeting with some dreadful accident is impounded till the jury can be called together for an inquest. We associate it mentally with the prison and the workhouse. Yet, when we are called upon as citizens to sit on coroners' juries, we see nothing incongruous in the fact that a public house is considered a fitting place to take the corpse for the purpose of an inquest. This attitude is entirely wrong and a relic of bumbledom. When we consider the vast floating populations of London alone, housed for the most part in hotels, flats, boarding houses, or in lodgings, it must be seen that from a moral, hygienic, or economic standpoint, proper and decent accommodation should be provided by the state in every district to which bodies should be compulsorily removed immediately after death has been certified. It should, moreover, be a punishable offense to keep a body in any house unless a special permit be obtained from the medical officer of the district, showing that he was personally satisfied that suitable accommodation had been provided for the purpose. The following story is not beautiful, but it not only has the advantage of being true, it is also typical of what goes on around us in our overcrowded cities. Dr. Bruardel quotes an instance from his own experience where a man living with his family in one room died of smallpox. Here, on reaching the house, he found the family entertaining their friends who had come to watch the body. He says, there were bottles everywhere, even on the abdomen of the deceased. This, he adds, is by no means an isolated case. One can picture the insanitary conditions of such a chamber of horrors crowded with persons whose ideas of personal cleanliness at any time were not very urgent. The blinds would probably be drawn, the windows shut, and the family, with the usual complement of small children and babies, would eat and sleep in the poisoned atmosphere. So overlaid are all our primary customs by empty sentiment and clown patches of tradition, that this crying abuse, which is relatively as bad for the vast population of small villa residences as for those who inhabit the slums, can only be effectively attacked by the example of those whose doings are aped by lesser minds. Do we not find an opportunity here for the undertaker to justify himself? Could he not provide suitable mortuary accommodation to meet the needs of those who still have a feeling about public mortuaries? Certainly, in some cases, he has risen to the occasion and has provided for a substantial consideration, a temporary resting place for his clients. The writer had a recent opportunity of inspecting the premises of one of these super undertakers. He was shown with pride a chapel where the rich might lie in state. Needless to say, it was resplendent with every conceivable vulgarity dear to the dismal trader's heart, where imitation stained glass and bastard Gothic decoration gave an air of theatrical sanctity. In place of what was required, a simple, well-ventilated chamber, furnished only with the necessary provision for burying the coffin. It was tricked out to resemble a place of worship, plus all his beastly trappings of death. When will it occur to the trader that his province is to supply a box and a decent vehicle, and only that, and leave the question of ceremonies to the clergy, if we need them? Let us rather entrust our bodies to the inspector of nuisances till some proper provisions can be made by the state. With regard to the time allowed to elapse between death and burial in this country, we are generally in agreement with the customs of Greece and Rome to await the period of physical decay. In Germany, 48 hours only is allowed. Spain and Portugal, 5 or 6 hours. France, 24 hours. In other countries, the time is largely dictated by the climate. What is this? This Victorian atrocity, printed in black and silver, was supplied by the undertaker. The memorial card was attached, the whole intended to be framed and glazed. Illustration approximately half full size. Note the traditional symbols of grief, the inverted torch, palm of martyrdom, broken column, ivy, and weeping willow. I mean, is it really that bad? I mean, what is that? I don't even know what the hell it is. Looks like a witch. That looks like a hooker. So maybe it is inappropriate. All right, that's all for chapter 1 and 2. That was exciting. And sure to be a fan favorite. Funeral customs. That's all, bros. Goodbye.